Hi, hello. Thank you, Kenya.
Indeed, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for coming out here on such a rainy day.
I know. I haven't been outside since this morning, so I heard it's still raining.
Yeah. But it's a great opportunity to be with you. We were together this morning I was watching you do your show.
No, Pastor A.R. Bernard was a guest co-host on Way Up with Angela Yee, and it was amazing this morning because you did bring such a great perspective to Ask Yee. You know, we were giving advice together, which I enjoyed, and even just with our callers and our topics, you're a big Tom Brady fan, and he's not biased when it comes to doing the gossip.
Not at all, not at all. But I think what I noticed, which was fantastic, your platform. You have a platform not only to give critique on culture, especially what's happening in pop culture, but also respond to people in need, people in crisis. I was amazed at some of the phone calls that came in and the problems that were presented to you and your approach. And then discovered that you not only respond on radio, but you go beyond that and in some occasions get involved in the personal lives of the individuals that called you.
Yeah, that's the Ask Yee segment, and I've been doing that for as long as when we were doing the Breakfast Club. Even when I worked at Sirius, I had a segment called My Friend Wants to Know. And that all happened because even when I was younger and in real life, my friends would always come to me for advice about everything. I'm a Capricorn, so I'm very practical. And I also am not judgmental, and that's one of the main things that I try to make sure that my friends feel comfortable enough that if something's going on, they can come to me and I can step back and not put judgment on whatever is happening and also be supportive and not make people feel bad about choices. There might be times when a friend of mine is married to somebody who I can't stand, but you know, you may know that, but then I'm not gonna keep on saying it and bringing it up if that's your husband or, that's whatever. I respect it and I support you in whatever decision you make.
Now we're getting into relationships and navigating relationships. Well, in fact, best place to start. You and I have known each other for quite some time. We've done events together. We have people in common, Jamie Hector, and you work closely with his organization, and we do too.
Yeah, philanthropy is so important. And when I see people, especially he's from Brooklyn, I'm from Brooklyn, he has his Moving Mountains organization. You're on the board. And I host his gala annually. I think I missed one year, and I was very offended. He didn't ask me, but it was virtual. And sometimes he hesitates. Sometimes I feel like people think, I don't want to ask this person to do this. I've asked them so many times in the past, but I really do enjoy being able to be present, and especially when I can see the good that an organization is doing. And so part of what I do is I work with the New York Public Library. I work with the University of the West Indies, giving scholarships. There's a lot of ways that I like to spend my time outside of work that really does involve the community.
Something that we share, and it plays out in what we do. We share the belief that we're here to make a difference, that we're here to flourish as individuals, navigating all of the realities of human experience, but at the same time, give back and make a difference in someone else's life and in this world in which we live.
Yes, and what I love about what Pastor A.R. Bernard does is not only is he a spiritual leader, but you also have such a great background when it comes to finance because of banking. And I know that's not your true passion, but to see how you can transform that into business and into how that can help communities and help people, I think that's important too.
I never realized when I was in banking that I'd be doing what I'm doing today. It was far from me, and growing up as a kid, you wouldn't tell me I'd be a pastor. But here I am. But I do look back and realize that those 10 years in finance and the corporate world helped to shape me, inform me, and prepare me for this level of ministry. Most churches across the country are about 200 members. They're quite small scale. So our church is in a 1% category across the nation. And in order to run an organization as large as ours, doing as many things as ours, having a business background has been very, very helpful.
Right, and even today, a woman called to ask for advice, and a lot of it did have to do with finance in her relationship. And for you to be able to give that, listen, in the church, there's a lot of resources that are available that you should be able to go to your church and find out and get connected to what things can be helpful to you in your situation.
And in our Christian tradition, we believe that Jesus preached two things. Number one, personal transformation, the transformation of the individual towards good. But secondly, social reform, our responsibility to change society, to affect society in some way. And that's a big role that the church should have in a local community. It should be that place, that safe space that people can go to and get the kind of help that they need.
Right. And, I know when we were back there, we were talking about this because I was saying, even with finances, like I didn't grow up in a household where my parents had positive conversations about money. Yeah. All the conversations about money was my dad yelling at my mom for spending it, and my mom hiding her shopping bags in the trunk of the car so that he wouldn't know that she went shopping. Piles of bills that were not opened, that would be in a drawer. Those were the type of conversations that they were having at home. So money was always a really scary situation for me. And also being open and honest with your significant other about your finances has always felt like taboo to me.
In many of the polls that were done and research that was done, three top things: communication, sex, and money, when it came to issues that caused downfall, especially of marriages, relationships. And people need to know how to navigate those things. So tonight...
Not infidelity wasn't on there?
No. So talking about relationships, where do you want to start?
Let's start with family. I think that's important because I feel like a lot of what we do, even if we don't realize it, goes back to things that happened to us when we were younger in our relationships with our parents, our siblings, our family. I know you were raised without your father, and I'm sure that had an impact on you, whether or not you knew it at first.
I didn't know it at first. I just rolled with it. Growing up in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, then Bushwick, Brooklyn, the streets played a big role in shaping my attitude, my thinking, and older individuals within the community who were established fathers or older brothers, et cetera. I took a lot of my cues from them, but to have that formal oversight of a father, that's so important, to give me a philosophy of life, a sense of my own identity and an idea about what the future should look like. I missed out on that, but I rolled through it without thinking about it until my 40th birthday. I had a moment where I was on my way into the office, and I thought about the fact that I had accomplished so much at that point in life and didn't have a father to share it with. And it was a quick moment, though. I got through it real quick, but that was the first time that really, really impacted me emotionally.
And even knowing that your father wasn't there for you, you got married, and you've been married for how long now?
In fact, this coming Sunday, we celebrate 51
Woo!
years of marriage. So it is possible, and I see some of the offspring in the audience.
Anyone else been married 51 years in here? No, right? Okay.
And we talk about relationships, you have to really think about that, because generations today are not getting married. My generation getting married in their 20s. Now people are thinking about it in their 30s and deciding on it in their 40s. And it makes sense because we're living longer. So if you're going to get married in your 20s and you're going to live until you're 85, 90 years old maybe, you better make sure that you want to spend 60 years with that same person.
We all think we do. But you were fortunate enough to find your person, at an early time in your life.
My wife and I were 16 years old when we met in high school.
I think that's so rare.
We got married at age 19. And I was very clear because I had to grow up pretty fast without a father. So I was working since I was 10 years old. So you mature a lot quicker in life and know what you want in life. And at age 19, we were young, naive about a lot of things, but we were convinced that, it was about living our lives together and our future would be together.
See, my parents got divorced as soon as I graduated from college. I think they were waiting for my brother. My brother's older than I am. They were waiting for us to be old enough to be like, all right. And oddly enough, they got divorced, but they still live together to this day. And
Okay, I think that's a whole nother show.
yeah, that's it.
That's, I'm just saying.
But I do feel like their relationship, my whole life growing up, I could tell they didn't really get along that well. So to me, marriage has never been something that I was like excited about because it looked painful.
It can
You
be
know?
painful. You figure the context of marriage puts two people legally bound in a crucible of crisis. And the inevitable friction of human relationship that takes place ordinarily becomes concentrated when you've got to wake up with that person every morning, no matter how you went to bed, no matter what the temperature was when you went to sleep. You got to wake up with that person. So it forces you to communicate. It forces you to work through conflict. It forces you to discover things about yourself. And that's why I push hard on process. If you're going to get into any type of relationship, especially a romantic relationship, you should go through a process. And that process begins with introduction. And that's usually external in terms of credentials, because someone introduced you, you and I were talking about this, or you encountered that person in a particular situation or scenario, but you don't know much about that person. You want to get to know them because relationships can often be a collision of two histories, and they shouldn't be. So you need to know the history. You talk about family and how that shapes, informs, and fashions an individual. Case in point, if I may, we raised our boys to be very affectionate. They saw a lot of affection between my wife and I. So, we would say, I love you. That flowed very easily. So you think about that, when they get married, they're going to be looking for the same thing from whatever woman that they may encounter. And if that woman did not grow up in a home that was affectionate, she's not going to give that affection that my son will be looking for. And that becomes a challenge in the relationship.
And it's interesting because my parents weren't that affectionate with us growing up. They probably started saying I love you like maybe in the past few years. But I do tend to be affectionate now in my relationship. And so but earlier I wasn't. So I think I've gotten into a different space with that. But we also don't have like tough conversations. You know how people will be like, oh, my family, we sat down and we went over this and we don't ever do those things. Like if something bothered us or something was wrong, you just have to move on and no one talks about it.
And that's not good because over time, feelings fester, emotions grow that are unhealthy, and it gives strength to the negative. That's why principle communication is the basis for life. The life of any relationship, if you don't communicate, then that relationship is going to break down and eventually divorce and separate. So communication feeds it.
And I think part of my thing has always been, I've always had a lot of friends growing up, and part of that was like they were my family. Because the other issue with my family is, my mom is Black, my dad is Chinese, but my dad's side of the family never really accepted us. My aunts and uncles were fine, but my grandparents. And so that was always a sense of not feeling like you belonged in certain spaces. And at family gatherings, some, like, they wouldn't really talk to us. And so that was an issue. But I find that I always had really good friends growing up. Some of my friends from, like, 5th grade who I still talk to this day. And I always looked at them more like my family than my actual family.
And we're social beings. We are designed around relationships. Relationships is a network for life. And relationships can be more challenging than managing money. And people have a hard time managing money, but some people can manage their money and can't manage their relationship. And yet, as we live life from through levels and stages and seasons, it's always a relationship that moves us from one level to another, from one stage to another, from one season to another. So relationships play a key point. You could look back at your life and say, that particular point in my life, this person played a very, very important role. So it's always by way of some relationship that we move through life.
Have you ever had to cut any of your friends off?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, it's not just me. All right.
So relationships are spatial. Every relationship occupies a particular space. If I could paint a bullseye with the dot in the middle and then the circles and the white spaces, right? So people occupy certain spaces in proximity to you, and you have to know who can handle those spaces. So people who are closest to you, they have to be mature enough to handle that space, because they're going to see things about you, because there's a greater level of transparency and vulnerability, you know, and they have to be able to appreciate that, even if it's something that they don't like about you, but they're mature enough to handle that. Another reason people occupy spaces because there's a purpose for them to be there, and that tends to be more temporary. The level of maturity is what sustains a person in those closest spaces. And I have had to actually reposition people. Here's how it goes. When you have issues with people, you either retrain them, if you can. Sometimes you can't retrain them. So you reposition them. You move them to a space that's a little away from you to create a buffer. Sometimes that doesn't work. And the only thing left is retire them. You just got to move them out of your orbit completely, because they just can't handle that. And look at the success that you've experienced, right? Levels and stages over the last, 10 years of your life, and look at where you are now and the impact that you're having. There are people who didn't grow with you. And when you have people in your life who don't grow with you, they can become a weight. And often they resent the fact that you're growing. They want you to stay where you are, where they are, and they want you to stay with them. So you've got to learn to let them go, just so that you can grow.
Yeah, I've definitely had some red flags. And I can always tell when something is not, like if something good happens to me and I feel hesitant to share it, because I had a friend who every time something good happened, I felt like, oh, I don't want to tell her because things aren't going so well with her, so I don't want her to be mad that, you know, I have good things happening. Or if I did something nice for myself, like say I was like, oh, I had such a great month, let me, you know, get something good for myself. Or if I was buying a property or doing something like that, I never wanted to say anything because I felt like she was never really happy for me. And she was more, it would kind of make her more like upset about her own life. And so I would be like, well, let me just not say anything, you know, because I don't even want her to know that anything positive is going on in my life. And then I was like, why am I hiding, you know, the good things that are happening to me? And then I felt like every time she called me, it was to complain about something or talk about something in her life. She never was like, what's going on with you? And I was like, maybe this is just not a good space. And honestly, I felt like after I cut that off, it was so draining. I felt so free of not having to have them calls like all the time, of somebody complaining in my ear. And then you try to tell them, oh, maybe you should try this, or maybe you should do that. And they just, everything is like, nah, because this will happen. Or no, I can't do that because then, no, it's not a good idea. Like everything was just a no.
Yeah, but see, you don't want those negatives in your life. Early on, when you're just making friends and building relationships, it's about quantity. But as you move through life and you become wiser, it's about quality relationships. And now I judge relationships two things. Is it high maintenance or low maintenance? If it's high maintenance,
It's high maintenance.
I'm gone. and because I don't have the time or patience or desire to invest that kind of time unless that person is valuing, you know, that opportunity, even though they may not be where they need to be. So if they're valuing that opportunity, authentically valuing that opportunity, I'm more inclined to give a little bit more grace.
And one thing I will say that I'm very happy about is I've made some great friends later in my life Just even for myself being a small business owner and being able to connect with other small business owners and then genuinely building a friendship from people who don't need me necessarily for anything, but we really have great conversations. We support each other. We can go on trips together. We can laugh together. We can, share anything with each other and be understanding. I think it's been amazing. I know people say like, no new friends later in life, but some of the people that I've met really made me realize how important it is the people that you choose to surround yourself with.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they're either going to make you or break you. They're either going to sabotage or undermine what you're doing and your success, or they're going to help that success. In the context of my faith tradition, right? And you share that tradition in Christianity. Relationships are either born of our flesh or born of the Spirit. And those relationships that are born of our broken and wounded humanity usually demand the highest maintenance, and they tend to suck the life out of us. But those relationships that are born of our higher self and our higher understanding, born of the Spirit, they're life-giving relationships. They don't demand a lot. They give because they understand that relationship's about giving and sacrificing. So I try to discern, where's this relationship coming from?
Yeah, that's one thing. Whenever I speak to younger people, one piece of advice I always give them is to just look at who you're surrounding yourself with and make sure it's people that are encouraging you, that you can look at them and be like, okay, I love what that person is doing, that inspire you, and that you're inspirational to them as well, that it's not a transactional relationship like we discussed earlier.
That's a good term.
Yeah, and it's not that way. And look, some relationships are transactional. As long as you know that's not a friendship, it's more of a, okay, I like people to be straight up with me. Like if you need something, I don't need the small talk. Hey, just was thinking about you. How's it going? Congrats on everything. By the way, like just ask me, you can say, hey, good afternoon. I was just wondering if you could do X, Y, and Z. I don't like when people do like, hey, just thought about you. Just wanted to say congratulations. Like, all right, I started the show in January, but what do you need? Just let me know. Just come out with it.
I think about the work involved. There was a young man, I tell the story, and he came to me, he said, Pastor, I would love to just take you out to lunch one day and just talk with you. So I said, no. He said, what do you mean no? I said, no. He said, well, why not? I said, because if I go to lunch with you, it's going to be work. I said, because I'm going to be so conscious of everything that I say in front of you, I don't feel the comfort, the level of trust that I can be myself with you. So that's work. Mm-hmm. And that'll just give me indigestion. It'll take a good steak and make it bad. So I'm conscious of the demands of people and also expectations in relationships. We have to really consider the expectations that we have and that other people have of us.
Right.
Because people can often have unreasonable expectations of you for whatever reason that they come up with it. And then if you don't live up to it, they start judging you by the expectations that they have, that they never discussed with you, all right? But they had it in their own mind. And then you find them, acting funny, acting differently. And sometimes they're willing to have a conversation about it. Sometimes they're not. Mm-hmm. So when I'm in relationship with people, I want to know, well, what are your expectations out of this relationship? And shared values. Do we share the same priorities, et cetera? That's important. Right. It's important in business, it's important in friendships, and it's definitely important in romance.
Listen, I've seen you've had some shared value issues in business relationships. Pastor A.R. Bernard.
On a presidential level?
Yes.
Yeah.
But that is important because sometimes you feel like, okay, let me go into this situation. Maybe I can, be a shining light amongst some things that aren't, and it just doesn't work.
And I think that you have to have the courage to walk away. Mm-hmm. You can have good intentions, go into a situation, go into a relationship with good intentions. You see the possibilities, what can take place there. But when you don't see that happening and you see other dynamics at work, you have to have the courage enough to say, you know what, this is not working, I'm out. And I tried to do it quietly, but
No way.
quietly doesn't work in this
It
world
does not.
anymore.
And listen, some things don't represent you well either. And you have to think about, like I look at, there's a lot of podcasts happening, there's a lot of people doing shows with people. And if your values aren't, at least, not that you have to agree on things, but if you feel like, I don't want to be aligned with this person, there's no way you should be working together on something. It's hard, right? But sometimes it can work, but a lot of times you're representing the people that you're with as a group.
I was sitting down the other day and I got a call from overseas to ambassador something here in the United States or overseas. And it made me sit down because I knew it'd be taxing. I knew that I wouldn't have the proper time to give to it. And I didn't want to do it. So I stopped to think about opportunities, things when they come your way. How can I think about them in buckets? And I created these buckets for the first time. This is a good sermon. I haven't preached it yet. This is the debut, by the way. All right. And I realized things are either an asset, they add to you, they increase your net worth. Another bucket is reasonable possibilities that I would take the time to entertain and say, yeah, I should look into that. That's a good possibility. And the next bucket is liability. Bringing this thing into my life, embracing, or this person into my life, it's going to be a liability. And then the last bucket was quite interesting, distractions. Because some things are good, but they'll distract you from the most important things that you're working on and that your life is moving toward. And I had to put this particular thing in the distraction bucket.
Yeah, I like that because I always tell people just because you have an opportunity to do something doesn't mean you have to take it.
Yeah.
You know, you have to really be discerning about what is something that is important and motivating to what it is that's your overall picture, because there's a lot of times that things can seem good. Oh, that's a great opportunity. I don't want to pass it up. But maybe if it's not the right opportunity for you, then it's okay not to do everything. And sometimes I can be like a real people pleaser and want to say yes to everything. But to be realistic with myself, I can't say yes to everything. I really do have to pick and choose the places, because then you say yes and then you're getting ready to go and you're like, why did I agree to do this? I really don't feel like it, you know, and it happens. And so we do have to be very mindful of how we spend our time.
And I think our audience can relate to this. I've learned to not let my mouth burden my back. So I'm very careful what I say.
Well, that's a great segue. And speaking of discernment, we have some questions from our audience. So if you could help us with that, that would be awesome. So we have John, who is from Bergen County, New Jersey. He asks, I recently had my second child, my wife of 6 years, 2 children under 2. We feel like roommates. Is this normal? Should I be worried about my marriage?
Should you be worried about your marriage?
We kind of talked about this today.
Yeah. You should always be concerned about the quality of your relationship. Marriage is not something you try out and then bail out if you don't like the way things are going. And I think that our society, our culture has gotten very disposable of everything. It's microwave and disposable. And relationships become disposable, especially when you have children involved. So for me, marriage is about working through the problems, keeping the spark going, keeping the level of commitment and sacrifice involved in the relationship. In other words, do everything you can to make it work before you take that turn towards the word divorce.
And having young children, I'm sure, affects a marriage. I don't have kids, but I can imagine for a woman, you know, a lot of things change hormonally. I know most people I know have had some type of postpartum syndrome going through that. And then for the man, I've heard men be like jealous of, you know, the amount of attention I've heard people say this. I'm not saying it's true, but I'm just saying this is what people have told me. Like, men have had to come with the grips that, like, I'm a little jealous of the attention that she's giving to this baby that I'm not getting. And I'm sure it changes even the amount of time you can spend together. I mean, you had raised 7 children, so imagine the amount of work that takes, you know, not even being able to sleep the way you want to sleep all through the night. So I'm sure that it is, I don't, I wouldn't imagine that anybody's marriage has gone smoothly from the beginning through, you know, forever. So I would guess that there's always going to be ups and downs, and sometimes it is important to get some outside help so you can find some solutions and ways that you can work through things from people who are experts, who've had to see things happen before, and can give you the tools that you may not have yourself so you can work through it.
Yeah, if you begin a marriage with divorce as an option, that marriage is destined to fail.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
Well, that's great advice. So I want to take another question from Ama, who is from YouTube. Shout out to our YouTube audience. What advice do you have for a woman who has surpassed working on themselves and has not found a husband? What other factors are at play specifically for Black women?
Ooh. Miss Yee?
I mean, I think that I've never necessarily said, I think you are intentional if you say what I'm looking for in life is a husband. Just kind of like if you're looking for, you know, a job that you love, a career that you love, it does take work. It does take you actually like getting out and doing things, letting your friends know, letting your family know. I'm looking for a situation. I think it's really important when you date not to necessarily in the beginning put that much pressure into it. Like, is this my husband? It's more like, do I like you as a person? Are we best friends? Are we really good friends? Do we have shared morals and values? And can we move forward as friends before you start even thinking about the fact, is this my husband? Because that can scare somebody away. And that can also put a lot of pressure on you to have really high expectations in the beginning when you're in that introduction phase that Pastor A.R. Bernard talks about. So I would say to date with the intention of finding a friend first, and that to also let people know, like, look, please, like, I'm trying to date, and if you know anybody good, I love references. But I will say I'm not against online dating because a lot of times there's matchmaking that happens, that I know so many people that have found their significant other in that way if nothing else is working. So just like if you need to, if you're shopping for a house, if you're looking for a job, you have to go through every avenue to try to find those things. You cannot give up. It is work to find the right person if that's what you want to do.
If I may add to that, a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Miles Monroe, introduced a very important principle, and it applies here. If the purpose of a thing is not clearly understood, abuse is inevitable. So the question is, what does that individual think the role of a husband is? What's the purpose for getting married? What's the purpose for seeking a husband and having a husband? Because if that's not solid, all right, she can get a husband, and it's going to be a problem. All right? It's true with children. It's true for whatever it is that you want to achieve or do in life. You must be clear on the role that this particular person or relationship is going to play. Otherwise, you can have unreasonable expectations.
Yeah. Not just to have a husband for the sake of having a husband. You can get that. I know people who need to stay in the country right now.
We don't want that kind of husband.
Exactly.
All righty.
All right, so moving along, we have a question from Anonymous. This is so funny because I know who this person is, but I won't blow them up. So they say, how do you know the problem is needing to compromise versus the problem being not compatible? So compromise versus compatibility in a relationship.
Look, let me just, and this, I don't know how this is going to sound, but when my wife and I got married, we had a list of reasons why we loved each other. As we grew together and matured in the context of that word love, we realized that when you have a list of reasons, you have conditions. And if those conditions are not met, the relationship can be in trouble. So today we love each other for no reason. It's called unconditional love. And not everybody is willing to love at that level. And I think that if we had more of that as an understanding, all right, then we would work through all of the problems that will inevitably come up in any human relationship, especially in the context of marriage. It's about sacrifice. It's about loving sacrificially, redemptively, and unconditionally. And unfortunately, in a society that is disposable in relationships and so many other things, we get into it to try it out, and if we don't like it, we move on. But then we have a trail of broken relationships and sometimes broken children and broken family to show for it.
And I think every relationship comes with compromise. You can't have everything your way all the time. And so it is nice when you can compromise and be happy to compromise. All right, I'll go with you to, this football game just because you want me to come, even though I don't feel like it, but you have to come with me to this Broadway play. And so I believe in compromise, but I also believe that with compatibility is if the other person, when they are compromising, do they still respect you? Do they still show you that they love you even when you're arguing? I think that shows you're compatible. If even we're not getting along or, we're angry at each other for whatever reason, because that happens, do we still love each other? And can we still show each other that we love each other? And I think arguing effectively in a way that is, like I said, respectful, that is so important. And that shows compatibility to me where, we do things, but we make up. I'm not going to go for 2 weeks without speaking to you or ignore you or do things that I know you can't stand just to get under your skin. I always try to show that I love you in everything that I do, even when you get on my nerves.
Yeah, I think what she says is very, very important in terms of compromise. My wife loves Jerry Springer. I can't stand Jerry Springer. But there have been times when I've watched Jerry Springer.
And enjoyed it.
No.
Every now and then.
I was compromising.
There's some things Jerry Springer used to do that you could never have done today.
I was compromising. But yeah, it's a give and take. It's a sharing. And I like particular things and she will do it because she knows I like it. And that's what the relationship is about. And when we get down to talking about compromise and compatibility, in the early part of any relationship, you need to have a conflict resolution plan. Mm-hmm. It's inevitable, so you need to sit down and agree, okay, inevitably, we're going to disagree.
Right.
What do we do? How do we handle it? What's the process? What do we agree upon that we are going to put in place for whenever we come to those places where we're butting heads? And I think the relationship, the value of the relationship is more important than getting your way.
Yeah.
And respect will protect you from having to control.
Very true, very true. How do you know when it's time to end a relationship? That's coming from Holly in Harlem. Shout out to Harlem.
Okay. I think that if you've tried every avenue and every day there's way more unhappy days than happy days, and sometimes things do run its course, unfortunately. If you feel like respect is such a big thing to me, if you feel like the other person doesn't respect you, if there's things that you feel like you cannot just let go, if every time, if something happened, if the other person was unfaithful and you're like, because I don't like the fact that people think that if someone cheats on you, you have an obligation to work it out and stay. If it's something that you really can't move past and you feel like this happened and this is just not something that I can forgive you, but I cannot move on with you. I think it's just about knowing yourself and, knowing that if I feel like you've done this to me 8 times and showed me that you really don't care, no matter what, it's just not working and I've tried to do what I can do, then I feel like it's time to say, I have to move on. Sometimes you just look at people and you don't like them at all anymore. And, that can happen. The things that you used to find cute, like, oh, he snores, oh, he's drooling in his sleep, then all of a sudden you hate it. And then it's like no going back, and I've tried, and I don't even want you to touch me. Then, yeah, it might be time to move on.
I agree with doing everything you can to save the relationship. For me, it's when the life and dignity of the human persons in the relationship are threatened. You got to draw the line right there. And that can be difficult. But I'd rather see the saving of a life than to see people destroyed, physically and emotionally.
I always like to say I did my part, I did what I could do, and it just, if it doesn't happen and you've done what you could do and the other person's not meeting you there, then it's out of your hands. You can only control yourself.
Yeah. And the only reason it gets that far is because there's been a breakdown in communication. If there is solid communication, respectful communication, then there should be vulnerability and transparency. And the issues will come up sooner instead of festering inside because you're not able to talk about it. And I tell men, never verbally constipate a woman because it's going to come down sooner or later. And when it does, you may not be able to handle it. The woman has to feel the freedom to express herself and her feelings and emotions.
So true. This is a really deep question. It's from Anna in New Jersey. Can you have a successful relationship if one person is faithful in religion and the other one isn't?
Faithful in religion?
Mm-hmm. And like faithful in faith. Like maybe being unevenly yoked, she's talking about?
That's interesting. You know, biblically speaking, if you have a person who is committed to their faith and a person who isn't, it's not necessarily a reason to end that relationship because the one can influence the other in the direction of that faith. You know, I will tell you, there are men who go to a church to find a church girl to marry because that woman's commitment to her faith gives that man a sense of security in terms of the kind of woman that she's going to be. And he may not necessarily commit himself to the faith in the way that she does.
You know, it's funny because growing up, my grandfather was, he was always very religious. He was a missionary even. And so I had to go to church like every Sunday with my mom. And my dad didn't really used to go. And my grandfather, when I went to college, he would write me letters like, your father is a heathen, and your mother should have never, you know, been with him, and please, and he would send me like a Bible every year. I had so many Bibles. But, you know, because he was really concerned about my mom being influenced by my father because my father did not go to church, you know, in that way. And my mom was raised to be in church all the time, and that's how when my grandparents, before they moved back to Montserrat, you know, every single week we were in church. And then as soon as they moved, my mom did stop going to church all the time. And, you know, it really, really upset my grandfather. And so I think that bothered my mother a lot, that her grandparents, my grandparents were so disappointed in her for not following through. So I can see how that can affect a relationship. But I think it's all kind of dependent on the situation, on a case-by-case basis. Because I know people who are different faiths, and you know, one goes to synagogue, one goes to, you know, goes to church, and they still manage to coexist. And they're like, when my kids get old enough to choose, they can do what they want to do. So I think it really depends.
And it depends on what that faith demands of the disciples of that faith, the adherents of that faith, because some faiths are very clear. You cannot go outside of the faith to marry. You know, that's very, very real. You've got to wrestle through those.
And for her, that's up to her. If that's that important to her, then, you know, it will, I guess, show itself in the relationship.
Definitely. Well, do we have any more questions? We're good on questions? Maybe one more, two more? Okay. Okay, great. Oh, sorry. So we have, I can't read this writing. Igra from Brooklyn, how should you get out there if you are so comfortable by yourself? She was specific. Give examples.
Go to the Christian Cultural Center.
There you go.
It's a great start, okay, because literally everyone is there. I think it's baby steps. you know, and it's small things like to get out there. I think it's reconnecting with people who you're comfortable with and having them come with you. Sometimes we can get really withdrawn into ourselves, and we need to let people know, look, I am trying to come back out, so if y'all are going out, or you suggest, like, let's go to dinner, even just talking to your friends. Like, I love getting together with my friends from high school or my friends from when I was younger, because it does feel great to be able to reminisce. So people that you're comfortable with, you know, I would say start there.
I say get serious about it, get smart about it, and get going. Put yourself in spaces that will expand your relationship network and also challenge your ability to interact and relate to people. So, yeah, and small steps.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
great.
I love taking classes. If you want to take like a cooking class, you know, I just finished my real estate classes, so I'm excited about that. But anything that you feel like you're interested in, take some courses, sign up for things, go to some mixers, and you'll find like-minded people.
Yeah, I think about a woman who's looking for a husband. She never leaves the house. You're not going to find one like that. You've got to put yourself in spaces where you're going to meet new people and interact.
Great advice. So I have a question from Pat from Long Island by the way of Atlanta, GA. She felt that was very important. Good for her. What advice would you give to a couple who doesn't think that marriage is necessary to build a family and a lasting relationship?
I guess the question is how she defining marriage. Is she as a legally documented relationship? Because nowadays they bypass the legal documentation, and society is such that it's holding you accountable. It's interesting how people want to be in the context of marriage, receive the benefits, but not make the commitment. And I think that's cheating. So the laws have changed. There's something that didn't exist before. It's called palimony. So, you know, all right, if you all been living like you're married, guess what? You're going to be responsible like you're married. And I think that's the way it should be. Yeah.
And I think if both people feel like they can have a commitment, but for whatever reason, because I know that there are people, look, I have friends who are divorced now and went through such a traumatic divorce that they're like, I don't want to have to go through something like that again. And some people can make a commitment to stay together. If both parties are okay with that, and if it's working for you like that, then that's up to you to decide. I feel like there's all different types of relationships now, but if marriage is really important to one of the people, then somebody's going to have to make a decision. But if you're both like, we can be together forever, we can be committed, we can raise a family, we can live in that way, for me, I'm not speaking for Pastor A.R. Bernard in any way, but I can be okay with that.
And in the context of my faith tradition, marriage is a sacrament. It's sacred. It's not just a relationship that you jump into, jump out of. No, it is a commitment that you make to each other, witnessed by God. So that elevates it to a much higher level of responsibility and commitment.
And I also think sometimes people say that, and then when you've been together for a while, you're like, you know what, maybe we should get married. You know, my makeup artist, and I'm only sharing this because she posted it, but she's been with her now husband they've been together for 17 years, and I thought they were married this whole time, but they just recently got married. And so they made a decision to get married. They just decided now was the time that they wanted to do it. But prior to that, the whole time I just thought they were married.
Yeah, and look, you know, each person's situation is different. And we can be, within the religious context, very legalistic and dogmatic. And I learned that Jesus met people where they are. And he encountered one woman at the well. She had quite a few men in her life. And he was very straightforward with her. But he didn't condemn her. He spoke with her. He gave her dignity. He had intellectual discourse with her, elevated her to a place of conversation that wasn't allowed at that time for women. And I think that's the path that I choose. Let's talk about it. Let's see where you're coming from. Let me understand your story. And then I can give you some guidance and bring it up to another level. Unfortunately, when we bring religion into it, there are too many people who feel that you got to clean fish before you catch them. No, it's the other way around. You catch them, and then you clean them. Then you bring in a certain sense of values, a new way of thinking about themselves and about relationships.
Very good. So I have a question from TT from TNEC. I will go and make a disclaimer saying she said someone's social media, they posted something. I don't know which one of your social media, but she said on your social media, you said, I don't know who it is, single people should work on themselves, should be married people, I'm sorry, on your social media, you said single people should work on themselves, should married people also work on themselves. Who said that?
Guilty, I said that.
It was not me.
What I said was that if you're single, all right, work hard on yourself. Become the kind of woman, in this case, because it was Singles Day and we were talking about women in this context, become the person that attracts the kind of individual that you're looking for. And in our faith tradition, both singleness and marriage is a calling. So if God calls you to a single state, he'll give you the grace to live that out. If he calls you to marriage, he'll give you the grace to live that out. But you have a responsibility to become the best version of yourself, either as a gift to the world or a gift to a deserving man.
And I definitely think married people need to work on themselves as as individuals too, because I think marriages really work. The ones that I've seen that work really great are people who are great as individuals, and then when they come together, it's like a superpower couple. And so if you are always continuing to work on yourself, I think it's really important to not have to rely on the other person, but to know that you can, if it's necessary, but to know that you got you and I can, I got you too. But I think sometimes people get lost, in thinking that they don't have to be a complete person themselves, and everybody has to be a complete person in a marriage.
That's well said. A very important point, because too often we think that if I get married, the spouse is going to make up for all of the deficiencies that I have in myself. So what happens when you get into that relationship and you outgrow those deficiencies? Does that mean you no longer need that person to fill that space? I think you should bring the whole you, the complete you, to the relationship, both sides. We talk about 50-50. No, we need 100 on each side. You come 100 as yourself, and the other person should be 100 of themselves.
Good. How are we doing on time? All right. Time for more? One more, maybe? Okay, so Ashley from Long Island asks, what is your best tip for diffusing an argument?
For diffusing?
Yes, diffusing an argument.
I liked it. Well, first of all, I count to 10 backwards because I don't ever want to say anything in the heat of an argument that I regret later. So I'm really good at making sure that I can, if I don't have anything great to say at that moment and I know I'm very angry, I have a million thoughts in my head, but I'll just be still for a moment. And I think it's important for me, to diffuse an argument, I need a little bit of time until we both can calm down. So that might be an hour of, you know what, let's revisit this. I'm angry right now, and I just want to calm down so we can really have a better communication with each other where we're not at this height. Because sometimes in the height of an argument, you say things that you don't mean, and then you can't ever take those things back. And then you look at things differently an hour later. And so for me, it is, let's take a moment, let's step back, and then let's revisit this in an hour so you have time to think, the other person has time to think, and now we can be more rational.
In the very early days of my relationship with my wife, we set certain boundaries of respect. So if things ever got heated, and they did, we knew we're going to wait, and we're going to come back and visit this when we can speak more respectfully to each other and not cross those boundaries. And we've protected those boundaries throughout our lives, and that's why we're celebrating 51 years.
51 years. And don't text each other, because them texts read different than what you meant sometimes in the middle of an argument. And so I think it's important not to send long paragraphs. I can't stand when people do that. They send you 2 pages in a text, and you're like, you could have just, it's annoying. And then you read it, and you get mad, and then you're texting back. Don't do that. Let's just have a real, conversation. If we can do it face-to-face, great. If not, let's pick up the phone and talk to each other so we really can communicate. And I think Oh, and they tell you don't use the words always and never, like you always do this, you never do that. And to say, this is how it made me feel when. And so I really try to implement those things because you don't want to accuse people, but you want to talk about what this made you feel like. And so maybe you were misinterpreting it, and then give them the opportunity to respond and not talk over them, like have your say and then let them have their say, and respectfully always.
Yeah, and if it's that intense, find a referee, find someone else to come in and help to guide the conversation. If it's just gotten that far that you just can't sit down and have a civil discourse with that individual, get someone to come in. Call your pastor, call your church, call a good relationship that has the authority to speak into that, who's going to be neutral. I think that's very, very important. But, you've got to neutralize the anger and the heat of the moment and then come back and have civil discourse.
That's good. So I know we said one more question, but this is a really good one. So we're going to end with this one. It's from Tasha in Yonkers. Is there such thing as a soulmate?
I would say yes. And I would just say that. And I also feel like maybe it's not always just the one soulmate you're going to have in your life. Maybe, like, God forbid, something should happen, like a person dies, and then you find somebody else too. But I do believe in that. I do believe that people's souls can be so strongly connected that you really feel like that person takes you to another level and makes you want to be a better person. And makes you want to experience and do things and trust them in a way you've never trusted anybody before. So I would say yes.
If we're defining the soul as that which animates who we are as individuals, our mind, will, and emotions, is there someone who aligns very closely with who we are and how we think and how we feel? Can that happen? Absolutely. I think that. My wife, she's my soulmate. I mean, we align in many ways, even though we are quite opposite. She's unfortunately a Met fan. I'm a Yankee fan. I don't hold it against her. There are a lot of things that we don't have in common, but there is something that binds us together and has bound us all of these years.
Awesome. Well, this was a very powerful conversation. Wouldn't you all agree? Yes, super helpful. Can we clap it up for them?
I feel like I realized I'm way more mature now than I used to be because I really implement these things in my everyday life. I was not always like this.
Yeah. And there's no one size fits all for any of these. Each situation can be very unique and nuanced, and it requires communication. It requires thought. Questioning, debating conclusions that you come through. That's all important. And that's why, again, communication is foundational to any relationship.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you both for leading this conversation today. And I want to thank you to our audience sitting here in the studio at iHeartRadio, and to our YouTube audience at home. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you. And you can check out arbernard.com for more about Pastor and engage with him on Instagram at @TheRealARBernard. And don't forget that you can get more out of this conversation with Pastor A.R. Bernard's book, 4 Things Women Want from a Man. And you can tune in to Way Up with Angela Yee weekdays from 10 to 2 on Power 105.1 or on the iHeartRadio app. And if we didn't get to your question today, you will hear your question later on in a future broadcast. We want to thank you all for joining us today. I am Kenya Gibson. Until next time.
That's amazing.
Excellent.